Hello, Crime Squad listeners. Welcome back to Crime Squad Podcast with me, your host, Natasha. This is a true crime podcast that covers Canadian true crime cases, both solved and unsolved. I release episodes bi-weekly on Fridays, just in time for your weekend. I want to give a shout out to Helena, who reached out to me directly about my last episode release. Thanks so much for taking the time to let me know how much you love being part of the squad. It really means a lot. Today's episode is a continuation of a series I have been doing called The Devil's Playground. At the center of this series is London, Ontario's own Elgin-Middlesex Detention Centre, or EMDC, where a number of inmate deaths have occurred. This special series put on by Crime Squad Podcast covers the 20 deaths since 2009. If you look back in episodes, you'll find past episodes where I detail what happened to these individuals while incarcerated. If you live in London, or if you've been following the events at EMDC, you may know lawyer Kevin Egan has been working tirelessly to file a class action lawsuit against EMDC. Michael Peerless, a colleague working at the same Mackenzie Lake law firm as Kevin Egan, has joined the fight. Egan first got involved in 2009 when there was a homicide at EMDC, which was labeled as a trip and fall in the shower. This is, of course, referring to Randy Drysdale, who died in custody while awaiting a bail hearing. You can listen to Randy's story in episode 12, The Devil's Playground, Part 1. Over the years, Egan has had no shortage of inmates and their families reporting abuse or negligence within the walls of EMDC. Regarding the steady influx of inmates that came to him for help, he was quoted in a CTV London News article as saying he often had, quote, grown men breaking down in tears and telling me about what their experiences had been, end quote. In September of 2023, a London, Ontario Superior Court justice endorsed the class action lawsuit. The province of Ontario will need to pay $33 million to any inmate who served time from 2010 to 2021 and can provide details about their negative experiences at the detention center. For those who can't speak, such as those who are deceased, family members are entitled to compensation. Payouts will range from $1,500 to $35,000. If you are on the fence about whether or not EMDC should be held responsible for the conditions of the center, as well as the deaths that have occurred there, hopefully this is the final indication for you that inmates have rights, even if they've committed crimes. As we've discussed previously, something like 70% of inmates at EMDC haven't even been proven guilty in a court of law. Many of them are being held because they don't meet bail conditions. Today's episode is about 4 individuals who tragically did not get to leave EMDC after their incarceration. This is the story of James Pigeau, Sean William Tourand-Brightman, Chase Blanchard, and Malcolm Ripley. James Pigeau was 32 years old when he was at the Elgin-Middlesex Detention Centre. It was the second time he'd been at the facility, and this time he was awaiting trial for robbery and theft charges. He hadn't posted bail and was waiting for his turn in court. It was January of 2018. But let's rewind for a second and talk about James as a person. James Pigeau had a big family. He grew up surrounded by 7 siblings and was the youngest of the Pigeau brood. Can you imagine having 7 siblings? I have 2 siblings, one who is 8 years younger than me, and the other one is 21 years younger. So these aren't really true sibling relationships because for the case of my younger sibling, I wasn't even living at home. According to James's mother, Janice Pigeau, James was a sweet boy growing up. He was known to be a kind soul who would give the shirt off his back if someone was in need. Lynn Pigeau, James's older sister, with 16 years between them, said James craved praise and attention from people, and most especially from his own mother. I mean, I can understand this. James was the youngest of 8 kids. I only have 2 kids of my own, and I'm exhausted at the end of the day. I barely have enough energy to give attention to my cat and dog after I've tended to my boys. So it's no surprise that James craved that attention from his mother. James also really had an affinity for drawing and was quite good at it. Now, I don't know much about James in youth, so if anybody listening to this podcast has a memory they want to share, feel free to either email me or direct message me, and I'll be happy to make sure your memory is represented. What I do know and can likely fill in the pieces about is that life would be tough with that many family members. I'm sure money would be tight, and there'd be an endless supply of hand me downs. Psychologically speaking, James may have had a difficult time finding his place in the family and therefore craved that attention to help develop his sense of self worth. According to Lynn Pigeau, her brother struggled with ADHD from an early age and also told the Brampton Guardian that James had bipolar disorder. Individuals with bipolar often struggle to find the right way to manage their symptoms. Usually, bipolar is managed most effectively with a combination of medication and psychotherapy. I don't have access to his medical history, so I don't know if he was being effectively treated. James spent time at EMDC in 2013, where he befriended Adam Kargas. Those of you who have been listening since the beginning may remember Adam's horrific story. He was murdered by his cellmate on October 31st, 2013. James had befriended Adam while they were both in custody at EMDC. They were located in the same wing. Adam was an artist, and as I mentioned, James really enjoyed sketching as well. The two bonded over this shared love of sketching and artwork, and according to James's sister, Adam actually taught James how to create depth and shading in his sketches. Adam's death affected James profoundly. I'm not going to get into the disturbing details of how Adam died. You can go back and listen to the episode if you want to know more. But James was absolutely a witness to this horrific attack. And James had actually vocalized his concerns to guards at the detention center that Adam shouldn't have been in the shared cell with his roommate, or cellmate rather, sorry. His requests were not fulfilled. He knew that Adam was in trouble and was having a difficult time with his cellmate, and he knew how violent his cellmate could be. After Adam was brutally murdered, a crack began to course through James's psyche. He had witnessed such a terribly traumatic event, and he ended up being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and psychotic shock. Psychotic shock is also referred to as brief psychotic disorder, and it typically presents after a very traumatic event. After this diagnosis, James was sent from EMDC to the St. Lawrence Valley Correctional and Treatment Center. When he was finally released from the center, he went to live with his mother. Of this time with her son, Janice said he was taking a plethora of medications, up to 17 pills a day. She said his moods would vary constantly, from up and down to everywhere in between. It was an observance of contrasts. She said, quote, "Some days he wouldn't eat, other days you couldn't fill him up. He would sleep for days, then stay awake for days." Likely linked to his PTSD diagnosis, James also had night terrors. Janice recalls hearing him having episodes of night terrors and recalls feeling helpless as a parent. This is why it wasn't surprising to Lynn or to myself as I'm researching this that James turned to illegal substances. As we've discussed before, people do not set out to become addicted to substances. They are often looking for an outlet, a way to numb or release pain, a way to feel good when they feel so terrible, even if just for a moment. Now, back to EMDC, James desperately wanted to see change within there. He was disgusted with what Adam had gone through, and he actually joined a civil suit launched against the facility. James had also been speaking openly to media outlets about what he had witnessed and his experiences within EMDC. He had apparently been speaking to the Fifth Estate, and he kept diligent records by writing frequently in a journal. Ultimately, again, James just wanted to see change. He wanted to see safety measures implemented and elimination of the severe crowding of inmates. Now, I've talked previously about the logistics of cell sharing at EMDC, but here's a refresher in case you forgot or in case you're listening for the first time. This facility, located on Exeter Road in London, Ontario, was originally built to house 150 inmates with one per cell. At some point, the occupancy was changed to accommodate 450 inmates. The problem with this gross inflation is that the tiny one-person cells are now housing up to 3 inmates at a time. In order to accommodate 3 inmates, mattresses are being placed on the cell floor to act as sleeping areas. So this is clearly a recipe for disaster. Not only that, but drugs are also rampant in the jail. Now, James wasn't the only one speaking up. There were others too who wanted their voices heard. There were others who also suffered extreme violence. A little bit about the culture of the jail. So, this is especially due to overcrowding. The culture of the jail is one where there's heavy inmate on inmate violence. There is also no clear distinction between violent offenders and offenders who haven't been charged with violent crimes. And this was part of the problem that Adam Kargus faced with his cellmate, Anthony George. Lawyer Kevin Egan has said the culture of the jail is that the meanest, toughest inmates run specific sections or wings of the jail. They post rules that other inmates must read and follow, and if the rules aren't followed, the inmates that are leading through will actually deliver punishment. The rules can vary, but include things like requesting permission to use the phone or giving up food or medication to other inmates. Apparently, inmates are also pitted against each other and must fight for pure entertainment of the other inmates. If they refuse to do this, they're beaten mercilessly. So Kevin Egan, who I just mentioned, is again that lawyer who represents a lot of the inmates at EMDC, and he was actually representing James in the lawsuit regarding Adam Kargus's death. So according to Egan, in late 2017, while incarcerated, James was actually taken from EMDC by ambulance to a hospital. The reason? He had apparently been assaulted by a number of guards. In fact, James spoke to Egan about the assault. Though James was trying to change things for the better, speaking out had actually made him a target, and his enemy list was growing. Egan has attempted to receive video surveillance from the superintendent at EMDC, requesting it as part of an investigation into James's assault by those guards. This has never been provided. The Fifth Estate also filed a Freedom of Information request to obtain surveillance images of the assault, but they have also yet to receive a response. This is what James told the Fifth Estate via phone call after he was viciously attacked and assaulted. They threw a hood over my head, and as they were dragging me down to the hole, the guy behind me was stepping on my shackles, the handcuffs on my feet. You step on those, and basically you release and kick me in the back to get it going again. I get down there, and when they're in the cell, they beat the living fuck out of me, and then I demand that pictures be taken, and they did. And I think about an hour, 2 hours later, they found me on the floor, unconscious. To corroborate this story, Egan also claims that he witnessed wounds on James, which included a wound that had turned septic due to infection. James's sister Lynn also corroborates this story, but the difference here is that James told her he was jumped by other inmates and not guards. At any rate, whether it was an inmate attack or a takedown by guards, as a result of this senseless violence, James was in a wheelchair and he couldn't walk. James also had a lot to say about the drug use at EMDC. Drugs would regularly be smuggled in, whether it be in orifices or by visitors. One of the commonly smuggled drugs is fentanyl. I've talked a lot about fentanyl in this series. As a refresher, it's an extremely potent opioid, and one where abusers of this drug have a high likelihood of overdosing and dying. In fact, fentanyl has been responsible for many of the deaths at EMDC. During an interview with the Fifth Estate, James recalled an inmate on the wing who hadn't ever touched a drug like fentanyl. James said, quote, "No wonder people are depressed. I know the one guy, he's never touched fentanyl in his life, but after 2 weeks of sleeping on the floor and being treated like a piece of shit, as soon as he was offered, he didn't even think twice." End quote. James went on to say that after the inmate took the fentanyl, he nearly overdosed. James kept an eye on him for the next 3 hours until the high wore down. James admitted that yes, he did smoke pot that was smuggled in, but he would never touch fentanyl because of its high mortality rate. In fact, he was quoted as saying, quote, "Sometimes they put some nasty chemicals in that. I don't deal with fentanyl. I stay away from that." End quote. So why then was James found deceased in his cell on the morning of January 7th, 2018, and his cause of death was later ruled fentanyl overdose? If this doesn't sit right with you, you're in good company. According to the coroner's statement that's on record, James was in a single cell and was checked in on at 7:09 in the morning. At that time, he appeared to be breathing. Breakfast was delivered at approximately 7:50 a.m., at which point James was observed in his cell with a black substance around his mouth. He was unresponsive. It was later ruled he died of an overdose of fentanyl. Janice Pigeau, James's mother, knows he would never have willingly taken fentanyl. Now, obviously, this is strictly conjecture, but there may be more to the story than just an overdose. If we look at the facts, James was making many enemies because of his whistleblowing to the media. He had been the victim of violence numerous times during his time at EMDC. Even Kevin Egan, James's lawyer, said this to CBC News, quote, "I think there's reasonable cause to have a healthy suspicion that there may be something more to it than a simple drug overdose. I really hope the police do a thorough investigation." End quote. He was one of several inmates suing the province for $15 million regarding the death of his friend Adam Kargas. He was also helping Egan with information on other cases. According to the London Free Press, James had both written to and called the Free Press raising the issue of conditions at the EMDC. He had sent records he had kept of dates of lockdowns and complained of the assaults by not just inmates, but correctional officers also. Ultimately, regardless of how the life of James Pigeau ended, it ended at the Elgin-Middlesex Detention Center. James was the 13th person to lose his life at EMDC since 2009. What remains of James, though, are the memories, and also a call for change and the creation of a forum for families impacted by these deaths in order to have an outlet. Lynn Pigeau created the Justice for Inmates Facebook group to help push change forward. I browsed James's former Facebook page. It's so crazy how we leave these imprints on the internet long after we're gone. According to his Facebook page, and I mean, obviously, social media, we put out what we want to present to the world. But from what I can see, James was the kind of guy that liked to unwind and have a good time with friends. He appears to have a loving family. And you can see what a great dad he is to his young daughter. There are photos of the two of them together in a small engine aircraft, enjoying her first flight. And in one post, he gushes about how she will be starting her first horse riding lesson the following week. Sadly, his daughter will now grow up without a father, and his siblings will be missing one of their brood. Everyone who knows James will miss him dearly. Rest in peace, James Pigeau. Imagine you had everything going for you. A good job. 3 beautiful children. You have a personality that makes you full of ambition and good work ethic. While outwardly everything is great, inside is a different story. A few quick facts on mental health. Did you know mental health and mental illness are not the same thing? Everyone has mental health and will experience challenges regarding their mental well-being, but not everyone will experience a mental illness. In fact, by age 40, 50% of the population will have or have had a mental illness. It affects people of all ages, education, income levels, and cultures. According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, mental illnesses can be caused by a number of things, such as genetics, biology, personality traits, and environmental factors. Certain life events, such as violence or trauma in childhood or adulthood, can be a major factor in mental health or substance use issues. There's also the factors of physical existence, such as access to safe and affordable housing, available education and employment opportunities, freedom from violence, good access to healthcare, and more. There is obviously still a very big stigma around mental health and mental illness. Substance use also carries a fair amount of judgment from the general population. This stigma, though, creates and deepens social marginalization. Sean William Tourand-Brightman, also known as Junior, had a good life. He was hardworking. He was a great father to 3 beautiful girls. His eldest had just come to EMDC for a visit less than a week before Junior would wind up inexplicably deceased. Junior was surrounded by many family members, all of whom loved him unconditionally. His uncle, Paul Howard, told Global News, quote, "Junior was a sparkle in a lot of people's lives. He was a good kid," end quote. Ever since he was young, Junior would shine in the things he applied himself to. He was athletic. He played basketball in high school, and in 2010, even had a brief stint as an MMA fighter. This takes a ton of dedication and strenuous training to achieve. He also worked hard at the family's HVAC business, where Uncle Paul Howard recalled him being a dedicated worker who just kept going and was just such an amazing kid. Although he had made good choices in high school, once he hit his 20s, Junior began experimenting with drugs, which led him to hang out with the wrong crowd. This created an alternate and troubled path for him, one that he stayed on for some time. It can be hard to get out of for many people, and those that do work very hard at sobriety. It's an ongoing battle to be in active recovery, but he was doing it. He wanted his life back. His family reports that he'd been sober for 4 months before he was sent to EMDC for a breach of undertaking. So, in case you're not sure what that is, an example of a breach of undertaking is as follows. If an individual is released on an undertaking with a condition that they cannot consume alcohol and is later found under the influence of alcohol, that would be considered a breach of undertaking. Winston Brightman, Junior's father, admits that Junior had a troubled past, including struggles with mental health and substance abuse, but he was on the right path with 4 months of sobriety under his belt. Winston paid a visit to his son at the end of March 2018. He said Junior looked happy and healthy during that visit, but a few days later, via phone call, Junior apparently told his father he was afraid. He was afraid about being targeted while in custody, and he was also afraid of all the drugs that were available within EMDC. It takes a lot of strength to be incarcerated and also working on sobriety. So I can imagine how Junior must have felt. Junior just wanted to get out of EMDC, and he actually had less than 2 weeks of his sentence remaining. The first thing he wanted to do, according to his daughter Samara, was get out, go see her, and give her a big hug. She recalls her father as being full of life, and I'm sure she misses him dearly. So what did Junior do? Was he a hardened criminal? What landed him at EMDC in the first place? Well, his criminal history was mostly related to his substance use issues. Court records show that he was facing multiple charges that stemmed from incidents in the summer of 2018. These were theft and breaching bail conditions, respectively. He only had one drug charge, which was possession of the deadly opioid fentanyl. He was sent to EMDC in July of 2018 after missing a court appearance and was at that time released into the custody of a family member that autumn. Now, this is where the breach of undertaking occurred. Reportedly, he failed to comply with the terms of his release, and he was arrested and sent back to EMDC in November of 2018. So Junior was due back in court on April 11th, 2019 to review what's called a Gladue report and resolution of the charges. Everyone in his circle, including Junior himself, was hoping that he would be released to a rehabilitation center to serve out the rest of his sentence. So, quick side note here in case you're wondering. A Gladue report is actually something that was implemented in 1999 by the Supreme Court of Canada in R.V. Gladue. This report means the courts must consider an Indigenous offender's background when they are sentenced for a crime. Factors that can be considered as part of the sentencing and included in the report include discrimination, physical abuse, separation from culture or family, or substance abuse. Junior's uncle, who had spoken to him just 5 days prior to his death, told Global News that Junior was feeling for the first time in a long time that he was on the right track, and there was something out there for him. His father told the London Free Press, quote, he couldn't wait to get out and hug his daughter. He wouldn't be taking a drug, trying to take a drug, or trying to kill himself, end quote. So what happened on March 31st, 2019? March 31st, 2019. According to investigators, correctional officers at EMDC saw Junior around noon sitting in his cell with another inmate. Junior was reading. Junior and his cellmate were the only two individuals in the cell, and it was a protective custody unit. The cellmate observed Junior was having trouble breathing around 1:45 p.m. He claimed that Junior began having seizures. Inmates yelled and screamed for the guards to come help Junior for 45 minutes before anything was done, according to inmates present during Junior's decline and eventual death. According to Junior's father, Winston Brightman, the coroner advised him the cause of death was likely fentanyl overdose. Junior was pronounced dead at hospital at 3:44 p.m., but the coroner indicated his heart stopped at 2:40 p.m. Sean William Jr. Tourand-Brightman was just 33 years old at the time of his death. His family and friends were left in utter shock. The end for Junior was so close. He was on the right track. Things were going well. He had less than 2 weeks left of his sentence. And then all of a sudden, everything changed. His sentence at EMDC became a death sentence. Junior leaves behind 3 daughters, his father, his mother, and a stepmother. He will be truly missed by all, including his siblings, uncles, aunts, grandparents, and lots of extended family and friends. His family, like so many other families impacted by unnecessary deaths at the Elgin-Middlesex Detention Center, just want to see change. They want to see more staffing, more supervision, access to medical treatment and life-saving naloxone kits, decrease in the overcrowding issues that are clearly at the heart of many of these untimely deaths. Winston Brightman will always remember his son as having a heart of gold and a person who loved life and loved his family. On April 23, 2019, Junior's sister Crystal posted a memorial on Facebook in the Justice for Inmates group to advertise the candlelight vigil that was being planned for April 28, 2019. She added a picture of a poem, and I'll share it here. They say there is a reason, they say that time will heal, but neither time nor reason will change the way I feel. For no one knows the heartache that lies behind our smiles. No one knows how many times we've broken down and cried. We want to tell you something so there won't be any doubt. You're so wonderful to think of, but so hard to be without. Just 3 months after the death of Sean William Jr. Tourand-Brightman, yet another death would occur at the Elgin-Middlesex Detention Center. Unfortunately, my research opportunities were so limited with this one. I scoured my usual sources, but it came up empty-handed for the most part. But still, the story needs to be told. Chase Blanchard was the 15th inmate to die at EMDC. My sources indicate he'd had a difficult life, perhaps one without a lot of structure. I can't say for certain, but it seems like his mother may have struggled with drug or alcohol use, but did eventually embrace a sober lifestyle. If anyone listening knows any information about Chase and you want to share it, please let me know and I'm happy to do so on your behalf. Chase was born in 1989. He attended John Paul II Secondary School in London, Ontario. As you may know, based on previous episodes and my overall vision for this podcast, I really try to immerse myself in the lives of the victims so they're never forgotten. The difficulty in doing this lies in the availability of information. I was able to find out that Chase could be considered a bit of a hard knock. What I mean by this is photographs of him show a good-looking guy with lots of tattoos, but maybe a bit of a fuck you personality. And no, I'm not saying tattoos convey a hard knock lifestyle. I'm covered in tattoos myself. There are other things, like photos of him giving the middle finger, the fact that he lists his job as a street pharmacist on Facebook. If you read between the lines, that sounds like a drug dealer to me. He also has mutual friends in common with me on Facebook, and one of whom is a person who is in active recovery from dealing and doing drugs, and one who's actually in active addiction. Based on this, I'm making inferences about what kind of life Chase led. But that's not to say he's a bad person by any means. As I cannot stress enough, people are often victims of their circumstances. Do you think the first time I smoked a cigarette, I intended to become addicted and carry this addiction for more than half my life? Absolutely not. Just like the first time the alcoholic had a drink, they did not intend to have a substance use problem. Life happens, and it unfolds based on actions and consequences. In many cases, if you take even the most hardened of criminals and dissect their life, you'll find something that happened in childhood that was traumatic and beyond their control. Sometimes people just have ways of coping with things that aren't healthy or wholesome. And nobody can judge until they've been on the other side. It's easy to judge from a high horse, but just remember, deep down, these people were once innocent of anything except learning to live. Back to Chase. He had a lengthy criminal record. His record includes convictions for offenses including assault, theft, death threats, breaking and entering, drug possession, and mischief. He was doing a stint at EMDC for an incident that occurred in December of 2018. Allegedly, Chase had broken into a unit in the complex he lived in. He was awaiting his day in court, which was scheduled for July 19th, 2019. Tragically, Chase would never make it to court for this charge. On June 21st, Chase was in court for a bail hearing. He was denied bail, probably based on his previous criminal history. On June 22nd, Chase was found unresponsive in his cell. He was later pronounced dead at the hospital where he was transported. The details of his cause of death were not released, so it remains unclear what happened to him. What is clear, though, is that there are people in this world who will truly miss him. At just the tender age of 30, Chase leaves behind his father, mother, stepmother, 3 siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and even a little girl, his daughter, who was born in 2011. I found a Facebook comment Chase left on a photo of his daughter posted by his father. The comment was left 7 years ago, a small glimpse of the father he would have been. It says, quote, "I love you, baby girl, more than anything in this world, Jordy," end quote. Rest in peace, Chase Blanchard. May you find peace in death that you did not have in life. The last person I'll mention in this episode is Malcolm Ripley. If I thought there wasn't information about Chase Blanchard, I hadn't yet begun my research on Malcolm Ripley. All I could find was multiple Facebook profiles with a picture of the same person, but all the profiles were private, so I couldn't view any posts. There was no mention of condolences in the Justice for Inmates Facebook group. The only article I found by Randy Richmond of the London Free Press, it's merely speculation. The article indicates that on November 25th, 2020, a 41-year-old male was found unresponsive in his cell. Paramedics were called and he was transported to hospital where he was later pronounced dead. Police would not release the man's name or any other details, citing an ongoing investigation as the reason. Randy Richmond made the inference that it was Malcolm Ripley based on several legal sources and friends who mourned someone named Malcolm Ripley on Facebook in the same week that this incident occurred. Some of you may recall from other episodes of this particular series that when a death occurs in custody, a coroner's inquest is mandatory. But what I found out recently was results are not required to be published for the public to view. This is sadly where Malcolm's story ends. There isn't any information about how or why he died, but based on the trend of dying inmates due to suicide, assault, or drug overdose, I think we can safely assume this wasn't a natural death. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Crime Squad podcast in the series I'm calling The Devil's Playground. This series has been released so far in multiple parts and covers the death of 21 inmates at the Elgin-Middlesex Detention Center from 2009 to 2022. If you've lost count, the deceased are as follows: Randy Drysdale, 2009; Laura Strawn, 2009; Adam Cargus, 2013; Keith Patterson, 2014; Jamie High, 2014; Floyd Deliri, 2015; Justin Thompson, 2016; Raymond George Major, 2017; Michael Fall, 2017; Murray Davis, 2017; Ronald Jenkins, 2017; Justin Struthers, 2017; James Pigeau, 2018; Sean William Tourand-Brightman, aka Jr., 2019; Chase Blanchard, 2019; Malcolm Ripley, 2020; Tyler Lancha, 2021; Clayton Danny Bissonnette, 2021; Brandon Marchant, 2021; Ronald Jack, 2021; Jamie Briggs, 2022. The remaining inmates I will be releasing in future episodes of this series are Tyler Lancha, Clayton Danny Bissonnette, Brandon Marchant, Ronald Jack, and Jamie Briggs. Be sure to stay tuned for future episodes. The next episode will be a regular Crime Squad podcast episode and will be in 2 weeks' time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to podcasts so you don't miss any of my bi-weekly episodes. Feel free to rate too. It really does help to get the show out there to other listeners. Follow me on my social media. Instagram is @CrimeSquadPod. Facebook is Crime Squad Podcast, and I just recently started a TikTok account, so there's not a ton of content on there yet, but you can also follow that. It's just @CrimeSquadPod. Thanks for tuning in to this episode, and remember, stay safe and be kind to each other.